Welcome back to Rod's Radios. This is part 2 of the Mullard valve or tube radio that I was working on earlier. And in the meantime, I've been doing some recapping of the circuitry here, and you can see the various capacitors I've replaced. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then a couple of electrolytic capacitors. There's one here, and I think there's one buried down here somewhere. There's another capacitor over here, but this is only a temporary one that I'm using to inject a signal when I start doing the alignment on this set. But most of the capacitors here related to the tone control circuit, and it certainly made a huge difference to the quality of the sound when I completed the recapping. However, there is one capacitor here that is a decoupling capacitor, and that's an important one that feeds the anode from the previous valve to the grid of the audio output valve. So all in all, it's sounding an awful lot better than it was previously. And the next job is to do the alignment, just check on that, although it sounds pretty good so far. These are the components that I replaced as part of the recapping process. The paper capacitors, the black ones here, were all leaky. These are the ones in the tone control circuit, as was this, not sure what this make is. This is 0.0047, which was leaky also. The resistor here was open circuit. That's in the Magic Eye HT feed. The cathode bypass capacitor in the output stage was twice its normal value. It should be 100 microfarad. It was over 200, although the SR was fine. However, this capacitor here was completely open circuit, and this is in the discriminator of the FM circuit. So all these had to be replaced. The owner of this radio, apart from wanting it fixed and restored, requested that it be fitted with a Bluetooth module, as he is involved in amateur theatrical production, and thought it could be used as a prop in plays where authentic use of appropriate sounds coming from the radio could be created as part of the performance. So I looked at the possibility for this particular model. There are various ways to connect your music collection from a phone or an iPod to the vintage radio. Any of these methods only apply to radios that have mains transformers in the circuitry. Now, radios with hot chassis are not suitable for any of the following. The first method is to directly connect the headphone socket on the phone by a wired connection to the phono input on the rear of the radio. This, however, has the drawback of having the phone beside the radio during this mode. So if you're sitting across the room, it's inconvenient if you want to adjust the volume or change tracks, etc. The second way is to wire a Bluetooth module within the radio and connect it directly to the phono input. The disadvantage of this, however, is that the module is permanently powered from the heater chain via a DC converter, and can interfere with reception, especially medium wave, long wave and short wave when the radio mode is in use. The third method is to utilize a feature in some valve radios with a Magic Eye indicator that blanks out when the phono option is selected. This feature can be used to only power the Bluetooth module when the phono mode is selected, negating any possible spurious interference. A transistor circuit feeding a switching relay is required, however, for this mode, but it works very elegantly. The fourth method is to cunningly, in fact, locate, if possible, a microswitch in the chassis that is actuated when the phono selector is pushed. This switches power to the Bluetooth module and is a solution where there's no Magic Eye on the radio, or if so, is constantly in the on position. It was this last method I was able to use in this case, as while there was a Magic Eye in the radio, it was on all the time. Here you can see where I prepared a microswitch with a suitably sized and positioned bracket, and covered the connections with resin glue for safety before fitting in location. Here you can see the microswitch in position. It took a while to get it in the exact position I wanted it, so that the gram activation button, when you press it, would move the microswitch lever. And here you can see it going in and out. So I've selected gram now, and the microswitch is closed, and I selected one of the other radio switches, waveband switches, and the microwave switch opens. Closed, opens. Perfect. I've connected red and black cable to the heater circuit, the 6.3 volt AC line, and it comes out here to a block connector. I have the earthy side here and the so-called live side here. And then there are two wires coming from the micro switch that I showed you earlier underneath, and they switch the live side of the heater chain to this block here. And the two wires are then taken off here and connected to the Bluetooth module. Back to the chassis itself now, and as you can see, I've done a bit of cleaning on the front of it. The front glass came up looking pretty good, as did the piano keys here, and these are looking nice and sparklingly clean. The back cover to the front plate was particularly dirty and dusty, and I've cleaned up that as well as I did on the pointer. So we're ready to roll now. I checked the alignment on it, and it turned out that the alignment was absolutely perfect and it needed no adjustment whatsoever, apart from a small change to the RF alignment on medium wave. But other than that, it's working extremely well. I wish I was as well aligned as this, because I happen to be the same age as this radio, 67. So let's see what it sounds like. Now I've wired it up in the meantime to an external speaker, which probably is the same as the speaker in the radio, but it'll give you some idea of how this radio is going to sound.
Korea has carried out a ballistic
and €70,000 worth of heroin and some crack cocaine.
Sufficient progress, we will have to consider using the safeguard mechanism.
The number of people in hospital with COVID-19 has remained relatively unchanged.
Over 2 feet of snow. Boston Mayor Michelle Wu says her teams are waiting for the heaviest.
However, it marks a 41.
Failed to agree on an alternative candidate.
In the 34 age group are more than twice as likely.
More than 1 in 3 young women.
The difficult days spent on the election of the President of the Republic during the
reports.
Women who took part in this poll,
This program, others, and how they still resonate. And just Foreign Affairs Minister Simon Coveney on that agreement.
Sounds pretty good. One unusual facet of this radio is the tone control itself. And on the tone control, there is a separate pot which is controlled by the outer knob here. And at the center point, there's a switch in the pot which switches over between bass boost and bass cut. And it's a very strange setup. It's unusual to have a switch in the middle section of a pot, but it works quite well.
Certainly thinks we'll be spending a lot more time in virtual worlds in the near future. And author and techno-philosopher David J. Chalmers.
While I was working on the cabinet and listening to the radio at the same time, a fault developed where the sound faded out over a period of seconds and came back when the radio was switched off and on again. This happened intermittently over a few days, so I had a closer look to see what the trouble was, and it appeared that the heater of the output valve, the EL84, was disappearing, and the odd thing was that swapping it for another valve made me think that the original EL84 was faulty. But it emerged after testing the valve out of circuit that it was in fact the valve base that was at fault, even though it worked okay with a substitution valve. Very strange. So I decided to replace the valve base itself. And here you can see the old one drilled out, at which point it fell to pieces, exposing the dodgy pin 5 that connects the heater chain to this output valve. Now, it took about an hour to complete this task, as the new valve socket pins were offset to the original one. so a bit of relocation of connections was required, but it worked out okay in the end. This particular valve gets much hotter than the rest, so it's not surprising, I suppose, that after 67 years it finally collapsed. While I'm waiting for some parts to come in for the Bluetooth module, I turn my attention to the cabinet, and I've spent quite a number of hours working on this section of the radio, but it's come out quite well. I cleaned up the whole cabinet, which was a little bit scruffy, and sanded it down and polished the surface on the top, so it's looking quite good. I replaced the grille on the front, the cloth grille, and I've actually used, believe it or not, a placemat for this purpose. It looks just like one of the authentic grille cloths from an old radio of this vintage, and it has enough ventilation through it to allow the sound to come out clearly without being muffled. I sprayed the gold parts on the front with spray paint, gold spray paint, and cleaned up the little decal in the middle, little Mullard decal, which is looking nice and shiny now, as I did with the Magic Eye escutcheon. And that is a nice brass piece which I lacquered to preserve the shininess of it. So all in all, the cabinet is looking pretty good and ready for the chassis to be put back in when the work is done on that part of the radio. By the way, I mentioned the fact that I used a placemat to replace the grill cloth on the radio. And here are two examples of placemats I bought recently. This is the one that I actually used on the radio itself. And if I put a light underneath it, you can see how transparent it is in terms of the ventilation, which allows the sound to come through unmuffled. This is another example which might be suitable for maybe an older radio, a 1930s type radio. So this has worked out quite successfully, because cloth grills for vintage radios are becoming more and more difficult to source and very expensive too. A couple of weeks have now passed since the last clip because I was waiting for parts to come in from various areas. Today, the Magic Eye tube arrived in from, believe it or not, the Ukraine. Ironically, this is the day that Russia invaded that country. God help the poor Ukrainians. Down here, you can see the thread that I fitted to activate the ferrite rod mechanism. And in fact, I had to restring that again because originally it showed on the service diagram that the thread or the cord wrapped around this part here. But in fact, that wasn't enough to turn the ferrite rods sufficiently around. So I've had to restring it to the actual shaft further down here. And now, as you can see, when I turn it, the ferrite rods move perfectly from one side to the other. Over here, the mains cord has been replaced as well. Originally, these radios were just fitted with 2-core mains leads, and I fitted a 3-core lead on it now with the earth side strapped onto the chassis here. And that's really for safety purposes more than anything else. Other than that, you can see the Bluetooth module that I've fitted up here. And I'll show you a closer look at that because I had to do a small modification to it. Here's the Bluetooth module up close, and you may be able to see this little black block. This was one of the parts I was waiting on that took a while to come in. It's a 5-volt DC to DC converter, which isolates the supply to the Bluetooth from the main part of the chassis here, again to stop it interfering. The other thing you may be able to see up here is something I had to change to modify the operation of this unit, because I found that the sound level of the sound played via the Bluetooth unit was much lower than the normal radio volume. So when you switch between radio and Bluetooth, the sound levels went way down and you had to compensate by screwing up the volume control. So what I've done is to add on this little module here. This is a preamplifier board for actually headphones that I got last year. And what it does is to amplify the sound by about 2 or 3 times from the level it comes out of the module here before it goes into the pickup input on the radio itself. This is the preamplifier board I got from AliExpress. As you can see, it's tiny. It's only 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters, and it cost less than €1 per unit, so it was good value, I reckon. So that seems to have been successful. So now it's time to put the back onto the set itself and listen to the result. First of all, a long wave.
And eventually, militarily, this hideous and barbarous venture of Vladimir Putin must end.
That's RTE1, our local station here in Ireland, national broadcaster. French station.
A panel of experts to discuss whether sanctions against Russia can make a difference. He'll be asking when and how they've been successful in the past. That's the briefing room at 8.
And that's BBC Radio 4 from the UK on 1500 metres. And then medium wave. I'm not sure what we'll get this time of day. It's late afternoon here in Ireland. That's an Italian station, strangely. That's BBC Radio 5 Live.
BBC News at 6 o'clock. This is Mike Powell.
Imposing the largest and most severe package of...
That's BBC Wales coming in. I don't know what that is. And the next wave band, of course, is shortwave. I'm not sure what stations we get on shortwave again at this time of day. There's no aerial plugged into this, by the way. It's purely picking up signals from the ferrite antenna.
A llevar ante la justicia a que la situation donc
From Europe.
Iar țara noastră nu va fi implicată în niciun posibil conflict militar. Președintele Минфина США за последние 2
Decâtarea acum, ca membra NATO.
UDMR consideră situația ca fiind foarte...
Well, that actually surprised me, the number of stations that came in on the shortwave band. Sometimes you don't get very much at all. And the final radio band then, of course, is the FM band, which is the one that's most useful and most used over here at the moment. We should get plenty of stations here.
A nuclear plant, with one report suggesting an airstrike had destroyed a nuclear waste facility. Russian troops are also said to have taken...
That's RTE Radio 1.
Tens of thousands of residents of the capital have been leaving for cities in western Ukraine amid
I pray that it'll come through because nobody here wants it.
Pope Francis appeal for peace in Ukraine, saying that the threat of war has caused.
That's RTFM2.
On land at
Again, one of our national stations here.
Because it is going to be closed literally from 10 o'clock on Saturday.
That's the Irish language station.
14th, 10 days prior, they'll visit Dublin. 6th place, 7th in the Premier League tonight as Arsenal entertain Wolves.
His anniversary today, and he was born on this day, 1932, February.
Chelsea, Chris Bryant was reading from a 2019 Home Office document.
The bar and exclusive drinking club, also known as the Hollywood Vampires, played host to both Cooper and Moon, and according to Cooper,
so plenty of stations on FM for us to listen to. And then finally to try out the Bluetooth module. And for that I select the Gram button or the phono button here on the front. And we get that little welcome tone that's built into the Bluetooth module itself. So for this, I'm going to hopefully try and play from my iPad some royalty-free music. Let's see what it sounds like. The sound is really good from the Bluetooth module, so I'm pretty happy with this result. The radio has turned out extremely well. It looks good too, and as you can see, you may have noticed the Magic Eye works extremely well and responds to the signal strength of the stations. So, if you have been, thanks for watching.